Welcome, everyone. This is Kingdom in Context. And let me adjust something real quick. There we go. I was on the wrong setting for my broadcast studio. Welcome, everybody. I hope that you're having a wonderful Shabbat tonight. If you're celebrating Shabbat, if not, hopefully you enjoy some rest this weekend. You don't have to work. But I just want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. We're going to be talking about the Book of Jubilees and taking what I would consider an extensive overview look into the Book of Jubilees, and we'll answer some questions about the Book of Jubilees after we look at some basic, some basic information about it, some basic facts that are available to us. So we just have to look for it. There's a lot of these books that were not put in the American canon of 66 that we just got to go look for the stuff. It's out there. There's lots of documentation about who has handled these manuscripts over time, which languages they've been translated into or from, and what other people in the past have thought about them and how they've used them. It's just the average believer sitting in a church or coming into the faith. They're never told that that there are other books that used to be in our scriptures or that were put into other collections of scriptures around the world, and that causes people to be very shy and fearful of books that they think are weird. But when we actually look at the meat, the content of that book, you start to realize it's the same. And that's, to me, that's the easiest validation, because there can be any person in history that has PhD in from his name or have some sort of, or is a rabbi or whatever, and they can make claims that they don't like a book and that it's not inspired or whatever. Those are just claims by men, right? Whereas other men will claim the exact same book is inspired and is beneficial for a believer to know and understand. And that's where, in my understanding, the easiest way to clear up that confusion is to look at the text itself and just see, what does the actual text tell us as far as what it's teaching, what it's preaching, what it's presenting. So we're going to look at the Book of Jubilees tonight and see what it says. So I just want to welcome everyone who's in the chat. Thanks for joining us tonight. Looks like we have West Blaze Music is here. Welcome, brother. Thomas Tavlov is back. Master Soup is back. AC, NEG. Cover to Cover with Jeremy Pierce is back. Homestead Adventure, welcome, brother. Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Great Deception is back. Welcome, brother. Kelly J. Let me see here. Welcome. Clayton Linhart. JD94123, welcome. Let me see. Donna Yeagers. Michael Benoit. I think I said that right, Michael. Is it Benoit? James Sims. Arc Builders CCMC. Certain End. Welcome, everybody. David Shear, welcome back, brother. Sharon Small. James Carter. James Henry. Eld Wilkins 25. Welcome, everybody. And Aramiston Stone and Vicky Lott, welcome. Jared Zimmy, welcome. Shabbat Shalom. We got a full house already. Well, not quite full. You can't really get on virtual meetings. You can't be full, but it feels full to me. So thank you guys for showing up this evening. As always, if you learned something from this, please share it. That's so important to us. We also just want to thank everyone that has supported us in the past. All of our people that, in the video description below every video, if you like this content, you want to support us, you want to see us do more of it, there's ways to do that in the video description below. So we also have a PayPal, a Patreon. There's other ways listed down there. So you're welcome to check those out if God puts that on your heart. If not, hopefully you get something out of the content. Either way. So we really appreciate those who have supported us in the past and are currently actively doing so still. So you guys are amazing. You're helping me give the time away from work to actually put together slides and teachings and research and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a team effort. We really appreciate you guys. Okay, let us look at some scriptures tonight. Let me see if I have any there's a lot going on in the chat already. Shabbat Shalom. Airy Lion of God. I think I said that right. And Yah's daughter. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, try to hold your questions. We're going to do Q&A as always. We'll do Q&A after I go over a couple basic things and some ideas. And then you may have some questions from what I'm about to present, So just hold your questions. But when you're ready to ask them, make sure you put it in all caps. That way the admins, the moderators can see it. And myself, I can see it if I'm scrolling through the chat and make sure I can answer people. So, all right, let's go look at let's go look at Jubilees real quick, guys. This is a unique book, truly a unique book. Wait 1 second. I need to fix something. There we go. Okay. So we're going to look at a little bit of the history of where this book came from and what it's about, how it's looked at historically from its manuscripts, and then we're going to look at some of its doctrine and what it teaches, okay? And we're going to break it down into different categories. But first, let's look at the history. And it says, this is something that a book that many of you are already aware that was found amongst the Dead Sea Scroll findings in the caves there at Qumran. From 1947 to 1956, they pulled out 15 different manuscripts of Jubilees in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were written in Paleo-Hebrew. Paleo-Hebrew was used as the language of the Israelites off and on up until the 2nd century BCE. And I say off and on because once you get with the returning exiles in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, you start seeing that there's an influx of different language. Just like in the days of Daniel, some of Daniel's written in Aramaic, which is an offshoot of Paleo-Hebrew. But Jubilees itself and the manuscripts that were buried with the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of them were found in Paleo-Hebrew. Okay, not Aramaic, not Latin, not Greek, not modern Hebrew, which is a modern script. Many of you guys who understand basic Hebrew understand that. But it was found in the language of Paleo-Hebrew that was used up until the 2nd century BCE. So let's look at the earliest manuscript that secular scholars have dated of Jubilees goes back to 2nd century BCE. That's approximately 100 to 200 years before Christ. So guys, this is a huge misconception in the world of, manuscripts and translations and academia, where they understand what this means when they say, oh, the earliest dated manuscript was 2nd century BCE. They understand that that's not telling you that that's when this book was written. That's a easy misconception that anyone can make. And when they say, oh, well, it's, earliest ones dated back 2nd century BCE, therefore it must only be written for the first time in the 2nd century BCE. That's not how that works, but that is how it's presented sometimes. That's the logical fallacy that we see presented from it sometimes. So that just means that from their methods of dating old manuscripts that haven't fallen apart from deterioration yet, that's the furthest back that they've dated of the manuscripts that they have. That's the furthest back that they've dated. Because if you're not aware of what a scribe does, you guys remember the term scribe that we see all over the place in Scripture. You guys remember me telling you a few weeks ago that Baruch was Jeremiah's scribe, that Ezra was a scribe and a priest, and he copied down all the books of Israel as was instructed of him in 2nd Ezra 14. So that was the job of the priest. They were supposed to copy, just like a librarian. They would copy all the books and the scrolls of the words of the Lord and the prophets so that future generations could have them at fresh copies. Because back then, the parchment and the different types of paper and papyrus they may have used, there was no preservation to it. It would wear out quickly. So they always had to continue to make fresh copies of their books. We do this today. A lot of people just don't realize how often this works. So yeah, so certain end is also using a different terminology that's called oldest surviving manuscripts. So this did not at any way imply that this was the date that manuscript was written, just that it's the oldest surviving that we found. So yeah, and James Henry, this is very, very common. The old manuscripts will get destroyed so that the new copies that they've made live on. This is just basic librarianship 101, right? This is basic scribal duties 101. But a lot of people aren't aware of this. Okay, so this is why I'm trying to remind folks that when we see information like this, if you're looking up the book of Jubilees or Enoch or 2nd Esdras or anything like that, and you see, oh, it's a Hasmonean Second Temple work, therefore it must not be legitimate to its claims inside, therefore it must be pseudepigraphal, then you raise your eyebrow a little bit and say, wait a minute, who's making that claim? Why are they saying that? Let's look at when are they trying to equivocate the fact that it was found, the oldest surviving manuscript or the earliest dated document was during the Second Temple, and therefore they're just immediately assuming that it originated during that time as well? So this is a logical fallacy that we see used all over the place to denigrate books that people don't like. And what I've seen in most of my research on some of this stuff is they do it with books that they don't know. That's the kind of sad reality of it. That's the harsh reality of it. And I'm not trying to be cruel to anyone out there that may disagree with the Book of Jubilees, but from me talking with people about this for years and years, you start asking decent questions about their comprehension of the actual book, not about what some scholar says here or there about it. What do you know about the actual book? They'd never know it. They rarely do they actually know the book, and therefore they just believe someone that says it's not valid, and therefore they want to take that belief and run with it. It's confirmation bias. So that's why we have an entire series on Kingdom of Context called Honor of Kings, where we actually go through the apocryphal, pseudepigraphal, deuterocanonical books and all those terminology, which is man-made anyway. And we go through those books that other people call by those names, books that used to be in the Bible, some of them taken out, books that used to be that are still in other people's Bibles around the world, but are not put in the American canon. So that whole process, we look at that with the show Honor of Kings. It's on my playlist here on the channel. You're welcome to go check it out. But as for tonight, we're just doing a quick overview on the book of Jubilees, some of its history, and then we'll look at some of its theology. So the next idea I just want to present to everybody is there is archaeological evidence for the book of Jubilees. A lot of people aren't aware of this. They don't know this. We talked about this in Honor of Kings last year, but no one commented on it. I thought people would be like just afire in the comments, just with joy or with curiosity to there's actual archaeological evidence specifically directly connected to the book of Jubilees. And you're looking at it on screen, guys. It's the antiquity of the Jubilee calendar and how it's used is from these 7th century calendar plaques. Is supposedly made out of bone. And it's a lot of these similar plaques like this were found at different archaeological sites all over Israel. And many of you guys are not aware that they're still doing archaeological digs all over Israel in various places. There's so much for them to go through. A lot of it doesn't come to the mainstream. A lot of it doesn't get told to us in the American churches, or even cross the pond, so to speak, to the United States. We don't hear about a lot of this stuff unless you're in a specific church that they go and find that information and present it to the audience. This piece of information looking on screen right here was discovered in 1983. That's almost 30 years ago. Or, excuse me, it's almost 40 years ago, guys. That's like 37 years ago. Think about that for a minute. For 37 years of your life, I don't know how old everyone is that's watching, 37 years of your life, you could have already known that this is an accepted book. But this is a book literally that has it within it and something that's unique to it, which is the calendar that's inside of it that only Enoch and Jubilee share. There's a calendar pegboard used by the ancient Israelites to keep their days and their months, their seasons, their feasts. And we're going to talk about the feasts that are located inside Jubilees as well a little bit later. So this is a huge piece of evidence, guys. If you're confused about, Pharisaical Judaism saying they don't like Jubilees, and then other organizations like the Ethiopian Levites that do like Jubilees, and then, you're like, wait, but who do I believe? Well, what did the 7th century Israelites use? This would be during the time of Isaiah, 7th century Israelite guy, time of Isaiah. That's in the heart of two kingdoms. That's in the heart of the scriptures. Israel's a nation still. They're rocking and rolling. They're keeping, these days according to how they would keep their feasts and new moons and all that stuff. So it's a big deal, guys. History that Jubilees has been preserved by Levites in Ethiopia for at least 2,000 years in the Ethiopian language of Ge'ez. It's a part of their canon, and the Ethiopian canon is read by Torah keepers that are believers also in Yeshua. So we have, for all of you that are Torah observant in the crowd and know what that means, it just basically means doing the commandments of Jesus that he instructed us to do, which is the commandments of God, the commandments of his Father. Very simple. It's our discipleship. So you understand what Torah is. It just means instructions of God, right? And the same people that believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior in Ethiopia also keep the law of God. And Jubilees is in their Bible. And they use it. And their priests use its calendar to keep the feasts. So that's a huge witness, guys. Huge historical witness. And if you guys haven't done any information, any historical research on the Ethiopians and where they came from, and their long-standing history with the Levites that live amongst them, and how many of them are descendants of the Levites themselves. Now, over the years, 1200s, 1400s, there's been mixings of different nations around them in Eritrea and different things like that. But there's still a group of actual bloodline Levites that are from ancient Israel, and they keep the law. They're literally a priesthood. I used to work with the gentleman at a job when I used to work at Avis, and his grandfather was a Levite priest in Ethiopia. So many of you guys may not know this, but Denver is a sanctuary city for Ethiopia and Eritrea. And so a lot of them will come over here and migrate here first to Denver. This gentleman I was working with is the grandson. So he was born in the United States, but his granddad that still lives in Ethiopia, he's still a Levite priest, like today, active Levite priest. Just think about that for a minute. Imagine if the churches in the United States understood what that meant for just 2 seconds. So these guys, they read Jubilees and they believe it as a part of their canon. They think it's inspired. Let's keep looking here. In the Pharisees of Judea, this is specifically the Pharisees of Judea, because those are the ones over time that formed the canon in the 9th century AD, that they call the Masoretic canon. That's what we call the Masoretic canon today, and that is the main collection of scriptures that's used for like the KJV and most of the translations today. This is why you guys always hear me talking about the difference between the Septuagint and the Masoretic. Okay, so the Pharisees of Judea, these are the same religious leaders that we see in the days of Yeshua persecuting Yeshua, because Yeshua is calling them out for not keeping the law of God and not teaching people the commandments of God. And instead, they're trying to teach their own traditions. That same group of people that we see a few decades later persecuting all the saints and trying to kill them, that group of people whom we see in, I can't remember the name of that council, but it's in like council, it's AD 90, I think AD 91. There's a council, guys. If anyone knows what that is in the comments, put that in the comments. But there was a Pharisaical council in like AD 90 where they basically said that they're going to exclude all believers in Yeshua from their synagogues because they, considered them heretics and apostate, and that they were, worshiping a false prophet, basically, right? Because they rejected Yeshua. So that same group of people rejected the Messiah, slandered him, murdered him on a cross, persecuted the disciples for years after, hundreds of years after. We see this talked about up to the 4th century with Origen. So we see that, this is a huge, no, West Blaze, it's not the Council of Nicaea. It's another council. I just can't remember its name right now. I'll have to go back and find it. But it happened before 100 AD. It was like AD 90 or something like that. But basically that same group of people, they did not put Jubilees into their 9th century. So 900 years after Yeshua, they decided we're not going to put Jubilees into our canon, into our Bible. Now, a lot of people will say that they claim that the Pharisee of Judea during that day, that they never put Jubilees into their Old Testament canon. And that's a claim of history. It's hard to prove, right? Because of all the tinkering they have done over the years by pulling books out and changing stuff from the Septuagint and all this. That's a whole nother show that I've done in the past, just on how the Pharisees were literally trying to hide Yeshua at every cost, and they were chopping up scriptures for hundreds of years in order to try to hide Yeshua. And we have all this testimony that I showed you guys. If you haven't seen that episode, I think it's proving the Pharisees, remove scripture to hide Yeshua or something like that. I did it like 2 months ago. So go watch that episode if you haven't seen it. That same group of guys, they don't like Jubilees. Okay, so what? Let's see what other people think, because I don't really respect these Pharisees of ancient Judea. In the 4th century AD, there's a gentleman named Epiphanius, and he was considered one of the early church fathers. He was closely connected with Jerome and some other people, and he also, in his readings to his audience, he cites Jubilees itself. So that's in the 4th century. So this is, I don't agree with everything that guy taught either, but the point is he had the book in his hand to read and teach people out of. And he's literally citing it to his audience that's reading his letters. That's something to consider. In the 9th century AD, we have a guy named George Syncellus. He was a Greek historian that tried to make like a history of the world. Yeah, there it is. There it is. West Blaze and David Shearer, they found it. It's the Council of Jamnia. Yeah, so unless someone else found it first. I don't know. I haven't been watching. But yeah, that's the council that they decided that anyone that believed in Yeshua would be kicked out of Jewish fellowship and synagogue. So this was creating a huge divide that we see talked about 50 years later by Justin Martyr between Christians and Jews, because the original Christians were all Jewish, but then there's this divide that's being created even amongst the Jewish people, because they were trying to solidify a hard and fast line that if you're a bloodborne Jewish person, that you cannot believe in Yeshua, just like they preach today. So I should do separate episode, I guess, on something like that in the future. But either way, we've got first century. We've people using the Jubilees in the first century. That's because that's when they buried the Dead Sea Scrolls. They've got the fourth century. Jubilees is being cited. That means they've had access to read it, understand it, to cite it, to teach it to their people. And then you've got it being mentioned in the 9th century by a guy named George Sellis, who's trying to create a history of the world, if you will. It's a pretty audacious project that he was trying to do, but he spoke Greek. He lived in Judea, the area of Judea, and he was trying to take all these ancient Greek manuscripts and actually make an accurate timeline of the history of the world. Jubilees was one of the books that he was considering, just as he did First Enoch as well. So why does that matter? Is because the book of Jubilees was also found in Greek and Latin and preserved in small fragments, not full total books like we found in Dead Sea Scrolls that were in Paleo-Hebrew, but in fragments. The book of Jubilees was also being passed around in Greek and in Latin. And so that's what the R.H. Charles, he's a 20th century Greek scholar and a Gia scholar and translator, he also explains that Jubilees is partially preserved in Latin and Greek throughout time, which is why it would have been available to the 1100 years earlier to this 9th century Greek historian. Okay, so this is we have a unique timeline formed. Okay, so the book of Jubilees itself, it actually the claim in it. So if you're looking at any book, let me just not distract everybody with what I'm about to say. This is super, super important. Okay, if you look at the claim of any book in the scriptures, the claim itself, or the words themselves, if they say that it was written during this time, then that's a huge claim for validation. That's something we have to take very seriously, because if this is something we consider inspired scripture, and that initial claim of when it says it was written and by whom it was written, if we can't validate that, or if that's not consistent with anything else in scripture, then we're going to have a huge problem. The book of Jubilees itself claims in the very opening chapter that this was a dialogue between Moses and the angel of the presence, that same angel that's instructed to go before the camp of Israel in Exodus 23. It's a dialogue between them on Mount Sinai while he was up there for 40 days. And that's where he tells Moses to dictate, to write down the book, everything he's about to say, a division of the days and the laws. And this is what the book of Jubilees technically means, as a division of days. And so that's a huge claim, guys, because it gives the chronological time qualifier of the text itself. To say it was penned by Moses, which makes it even more suspect why Judaism would want to reject it, and that it was given on Mount Sinai by an angel directly from God's message through this angel, which is a huge thing. So then, to me, that's like, all right, well, that's a huge claim, because now that puts it in lockstep with the same type of validity with like Exodus or Leviticus or something like that. That's a huge claim. Now I need to see, what does that book actually say to validate that claim, and that's the important part, right? But even just taking that initial claim of a time qualifier, if that's true, that puts Jubilees in 15th century CE approximately on a timeline. It's about 1500 years before Christ and Moses on Mount Sinai. 7th century BC is when I showed you guys that archaeological evidence of them using a form of a calendar that we only find in the book of Jubilees and Enoch. So that's interesting, because that suddenly we see the entire perpetuation of the children of Israel leading into the flourishing into the days of Isaiah. That suddenly gives us a lot of credence to realize, well, where would they even have got that information if they didn't have Enoch and Jubilees already? You see what I'm saying? So it's very interesting. And I can go into, I'm going to talk about also the new moons in a minute, but that's something else. So we go into 2nd BCE, all right, the 2nd century BCE. So this is after the days of Christ, or excuse me, this is 200 years before the days of Christ approximately. And that's when we have the oldest dated manuscript found, which is written in Paleo-Hebrew. So Moses is dictating Jubilees in Paleo-Hebrew, just like he would have Deuteronomy. So the writings that are attributed to Moses and the elders and the leaders of that day, the priests of that day, they would have transcribed and written anything and from Paleo-Hebrew. This is the established and understood language that they spoke. So we have, by the time we get to 200 years before Yeshua, approximately, you have the oldest dated manuscript of Jubilees in Paleo-Hebrew. So that gives you a strong conclusion of connection for that entire timeline. And right in between it, you've got a calendar that's validated by Jubilees. So in between that, you have a unique connection and timeline for 1,300 years, because that's the interesting part, right? Paleo-Hebrew is no longer spoken at about 100 BC. So about approximately a little over 100 years before Christ. It's all these numbers are approximate, guys. These aren't exact. So you've got Paleo-Hebrew no longer being spoken. And 100 and something years later, almost 200 years later, in the 1st century AD, you have Jubilees being buried in Qumran amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls and preserved by the Ethiopian Levites, because they're putting it in their canon, if they didn't already have it in their canon. I'm just guesstimating on the longevity, because I can't interview an Ethiopian Levite, but I'm guesstimating on the longevity of how the actual official canonization that they made from the books that they already had. How long have they had them? They're Ethiopian Levite priests. How long have they already had them? We know they had the scroll of Isaiah. We see that in Acts chapter, Acts chapter 7. Where Philip goes to talk to the Ethiopian who's reading out the scroll of Isaiah. Or is it Acts chapter 8? So we know that they had the scriptures, right? Because they're literally bloodborne descendants of Levites who they just had migrated over time down to the Ethiopia area from Judea. So that's something to consider, guys. So we have in the 4th century, it's being cited by an early church father, quote unquote. In the 9th century, it's being cited by a Greek historian. And then, of course, we've got it being rediscovered at Qumran amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls in Paleo-Hebrew. So, guys, no matter what you think about the Book of Jubilees, if this is the first time to see any kind of information about its historical validation, you've got a strong claim within itself that Hebrew was the language of creation, and that this was being spoken by angels to Moses to be recorded and dictated on Mount Sinai, puts it about 1500 BC. We see, according just to secular history, that Paleo-Hebrew was spoken by the Israelites up to about 100 years before Christ. And then we have the Paleo-Hebrew books of Jubilees being preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls approximately 70 to 100 years after Christ. And then we've got them being rediscovered from that original Paleo-Hebrew. All the while, there's fragments of it, or there's entire copies and fragments preserved in Ge'ez, Greek, and Latin. So let's look at 10 doctrinal reasons about the actual meat of what it teaches inside the book. Let's look at the 10 doctrinal reasons that Jubilees is inspired scripture. You guys ready? I know that's a big claim. All right. Let me go back to this real quick. All right, guys. I want everybody to be able to see this for a second, because I don't think I had it up on the screen. So look, we've got Jubilees being before Christ, documented in Paleo-Hebrew, and being found as one of those books, okay? And so the claim itself that it's making, that's backed up by that historical evidence, is not just of the calendar, but the language itself of heaven. The language being spoken by these angels to Moses was Hebrew. So this is huge, because that's the language has literally been found written in and preserved during the time of Christ in that whole era and generation. All right. So 10 doctrinal reasons why Jubilees is inspired scripture. One's prophecy. Number one, it has all the day of the Lord prophecies consistent with 1 Enoch, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Job, 1 Samuel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, Romans, Thessalonians, and Revelation. So the big idea, the day of the Lord, where Yeshua comes back with angels to rout out the wicked, to stop the violence on the earth, and to bring peace, that same consistent message of the resurrection that's included at that same time, which is a huge part of the return of the day of the Lord. That same consistent message is in the book of Jubilees. Various places, chapter 1, chapter 6, chapter 23, all over the place. Okay, so let's look at another one real quick. Number 2, the covenant. It has the promises of the covenant inside the book of Jubilees, consistent with Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Judges, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Job, Psalm, Ezra, Nehemiah, Zechariah, Amos, Hosea, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians, Colossians, Philippians. You guys get the point? All the way down to Hebrews and Revelation. The same promises of the covenant, which is you'll be resurrected, that the Father will forgive your sins, and He's going to raise you to eternal life if you keep the terms of the covenant, which are His commandments. Same stuff. The priesthoods, number 3. Jubilees is the same descriptions of the priesthood, how it functions, what's going on with it, and prophecy concerning the Levites specifically as being a part of the earthly priesthood. And that's consistent with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Malachi, and Hebrew. Okay, so it has consistent message with the idea of the priesthoods. Number 4, it has a consistent message with commandments and obedience. So it has Jubilees as instructions for believers to keep the commandments as a part of their discipleship and part of their faith, and that's consistent with the terms of the covenant as outlined in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Psalms, Proverbs, Nehemiah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, 1st, 2nd John, Hebrews, James, 1st, 2nd Peter, all of Paul's epistles, and Revelation. I didn't just want to put all the New Testament, but I think you guys get the point. Okay, the idea of commandments, keeping the commandments of God, that's instructed to us by everyone in the Scriptures, including our Messiah. That's abundantly clear. In fact, the entire book of Jubilees is expounding on the Torah, on the commandments of God, and how the patriarchs before Moses kept them, and why they're being instructed to Moses and all the children at Mount Sinai. I mean, that right there is a huge reason that Pharisaical Judaism would want to ignore the book of Jubilees, because they teach a form of dispensation theology which says Moses only got the written Torah on Mount Sinai for the first time. That is not true. That is not accurate. So that not just as it pertains to the priesthoods, but also information in Genesis and a whole bunch of other places. It's just not true. The same guys that were lying about doctrine during the days of Yeshua continue to perpetuate lies about doctrine in the modern day. So we'll just keep going though. Number 5, creation. The book of Jubilees has descriptions of how the Creator made the heavens and the earth, which are consistent with 1st Enoch, Genesis, Deuteronomy, Joshua, 1 Samuel, 1 Kings, Nehemiah, Psalms, Amos, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Matthew, Mark, 2 Corinthians, 2 Peter, Hebrews, Jude, and Revelation. Angels. The book of Jubilees has descriptions and uses of angels that are consistent with 1 Enoch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Joshua, Judges, 1 Kings, Zechariah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Matthew, Luke, John, Acts, Hebrews, Jude, and Revelation. All consistent, guys. Same descriptions, same use, same contexts. Number 7, history. The book of Jubilees is historically consistent with the patriarchal history that's also given to us in 1 Enoch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Malachi, Matthew, Jude, and Hebrews. It has millennial reign prophecy in it. Did you guys know that? The book of Jubilees has a consistent millennial reign that lines up with Isaiah and Revelation. It's pretty amazing. Number 9, it has feast day celebrations. It doesn't just have feast day celebrations like briefly mentioned, like Ezekiel just briefly mentions feast day celebrations or 2nd Chronicles or Nehemiah. No, it expounds on them in great detail, where they came from, how they're kept in heaven, who was the first person to keep them on the earth, and why, and what it meant to them. Guys, it's amazing. If you love the feasts of God, the book of Jubilees should be right there with Leviticus, Exodus, Numbers. It's an amazing book that venerates and expounds on the feasts that are called the feasts of the Lord, that are to be done with joy. It expounds on them in great detail. It gives you literally the origins of the new moon celebrations, which we do not get in the canon of 66. Book of Jubilees. Number 10, it has similar and completely consistent doctrine explaining and instructing for repentance of sin and for atonement leading to resurrection through God, just like we see in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Psalms, Ezra, Nehemiah, Job, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Zechariah, Malachi, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, all of Paul's epistles, James, 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd John, Hebrews, and Revelation. So sin, atonement, resurrection, consistent with what's taught in Jubilees, as we see in the regular canon of 66 in the United States that we're familiar with. These are just brief overviews, okay, guys, because I wanted to leave some time next so I could take questions from everybody so that you guys can, because I know everyone has a ton of questions about the specific scriptures that you find in Jubilees that you may, struggle to understand, or look at, you're not familiar about the context, or you think it may contradict something in the Bible. So this is why I want to dedicate more time to that. So you guys are welcome to ask questions. I'm going to look up here in the chat and see if I see any questions in caps. Remember, put it all capitalization. Okay? Because ultimately what we're going to be trying to do, if my schedules can coordinate with Ken Heiderbrecht to do Honor King Season 3, because our schedules are very different. We're struggling to be able to connect on that. But if we are able to do that, then we want to tackle Jubilees line by line, like we do with other books. We've already done the first 2 chapters of Jubilees, and that's in Season 2 of Honor of Kings. But we want to finish out the whole rest of the thing, as well as the Book of Enoch. So we just got to find the time. All right, guys. Let me see if there's any questions you guys have. A lot of people, I know right off the bat, a lot of people have questions about comparisons with Jubilees and Jasher. And as many of you guys may have heard on our channel, we do not teach from the Book of Jasher. We do not hold it up and support it. It's something that we've been looking at and reading and studying for a long time. I have struggled to find good historical validation on the manuscripts and their preservation, and finding like the same kind of information I could find and show you tonight on the historical manuscripts, and I can't find that for the Book of Jasher. And there's some things in the Book of Jasher and its actual text that does greatly contradict some things and some pretty easy details. And that doesn't always mean that it's not valid. It's very difficult for me to come to a conclusive decision that the Book of Jasher is legit. And so that's why, people all the time will say, well, there's things that conflict in the Book of Jasher pertaining to Cain's death compared to the Book of Jubilees. And I'm like, yeah, I don't doubt it. There's a lot of things in the Book of Jasher that is different than you see in Genesis or some of the other books, Exodus, Joshua, and, some of the other books in the canon as well, much less Jubilees. So that's I've found consistency with Genesis and Jubilees. I have not found consistency with Genesis and Jasher. See what I'm saying? So, all right, guys. So it looks like we got a first question here. Here in Obey is asking about Jubilees chapter 2, verse 23, and asking, is the Sabbath not for everyone? So let me see here. Jubilees 2:32, not 23. I apologize. All right, Jubilees 2:32. I'm going to put this on screen here in Obey because I'm not sure if you're citing the exact. Maybe you could be using a different translation. That's okay, though. Let me put this on screen. All right, so this will be Jubilees. He just went on to explain in Jubilees chapter 2 the Sabbath for like half the chapter. Okay, so there's a lot going in here. And it says in chapter 31 or verse 31, and the Creator of all things blessed it, talking about the Sabbath, and he did not sanctify all peoples and nations to keep Sabbath thereon, but Israel alone. Then alone he permitted to eat and drink and to keep Sabbath thereon on the earth. And the Creator of all things blessed this day, which he had created for blessing, the holiness, and glory above all days. Yeah. People that don't, you remember that Sabbath is a sign of the covenant, right, guys? So if you don't want to keep the Father's covenant, he's not going to, these commands, instructions, they're not for you. He's not commanding the whole world to keep something they don't want to keep. There's free will involved. So this is a situation where he's not going to make the other nations, he's not going to hold the other nations to not keeping the Sabbath when that's a sign of a covenant with him. And if they don't want to be in covenant with him, then that would be unfair to try to hold them to that sign, if that makes any sense. So he blessed it and sanctified it for him and the angels that keep it since creation began in heaven. It was taught to mankind to keep as well. But if mankind doesn't want to abide by the behavior in heaven, then, it's not given to them. It's given to those who want to abide by the behavior of heaven. That's the loose definition of being a part of Israel, right? Being grafted into the nation of Israel, and we're all practicing the behavior of heaven, the behavior of the Creator. So, all right, guys. Great Deception is asking a question about. It says, "What do you think of the lunar calendar for the Sabbath, starting with the first day or new month?" Starting with the lunar calendar. Now, I apologize, brother. We're taking questions on the Book of Jubilees. So if you're trying to ask a question about any kind of calendar that's been presented in the Jubilees, if you would please maybe reword that question. I apologize. I do not understand that question. So Julie Steinbreck is asking, what do you and your wife do to celebrate the new moon and when? Well, we just like Jubilee 6 instructs. Basically, as far as physically celebrating, we just make a meal, and I try to look up the day that whether it's the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, or the 10th, according to Jubilees chapter 6, and how Noah kept it within one of those 4 months, right? Which is every 3 months. And then whatever the day that is, I just look up, if it's the second occasion of the year, which would be the 4th month, I look up Jubilee 6 and see what, Noah celebrated on the 4th month as pertaining to that specific new moon celebration. And I just, read that scripture. Basically, we thank God for not flooding the earth again. And, it's because all of it's dedicated to the flood. And so that's what's so interesting about it. And we just kind of go through the motions kind of in gratitude and thanks like Noah did, and then eat a meal that we specially prepared between my wife and I. And that's very simple, super simple, very, very easy. Now, determining when, that's where it gets a little tricky, because you have to find a start date. And this is where I don't have graphs to show anyone. I don't have complicated slides available to show everyone. But once you determine your start date of the year, whichever calendar you're following, and this is what we've tried to emphatically talk about on our channel, is that we do not, at this point, we have not found any historical evidence that would pin down a specific day translated to the Gregorian calendar where we would start the new year. So therefore, you have to, from what we're doing, we have to pick a calendar, whether it's the traditional rabbinical calendar or there's a lot of other calendars that people have tried to come out with recently. I know that My House Ministries has a good calendar that we use it partially because they go off of a Jubilees and Enoch set time period. They don't have like a 13th month interjected in like a rabbinical calendar. So we like that organized structure because that's what we see in Enoch and Jubilees. And so therefore, once I know the first month, then I know within that time period of the first month, I just got to find the new moon. That's all it is. And the new moon is explained to us, I think it's First Enoch 84, where it talks about after the moon goes dark and then light starts to shine upon it again, and you get that first sliver of light as light starts to grow upon the moon again. That's going to be the new moon within that first month. That would be the first new moon celebration of the year that I would be celebrating. Okay. So then 3 months later in the 4th month, I'm looking for the new moon again. Right. And then that's how I would determine to celebrate the second occasion, the second new moon of the year, if that makes any sense. So it's actually a kind of a combination of, if I was in ancient Israel, I would probably know the exact day of when the new year started. But since we don't, I just have to pick a day. And I know it's sometime around, between middle of March and middle of April, depends on which calendar you follow. And so therefore I know when the first of the year is, according to biblical calendar ideas. I started celebrating Passover 14 days after. And therefore I know the first month, and then I can start calculating Jubilee 6 from there forward in accordance with how First Enoch describes the new moon. So that's how, sorry, it's a long answer, but that's why we've never made a video on it. We don't talk about it very much because it's just confusing to a lot of people. And it's not, that there's so much debate about the calendar. It just gets, it gets more unproductive than it does productive, Defender of the Truth is asking Jubilees 431. So let's go see what that says real quick, and then we'll pull it up for people to look at it as well. Pull this up here. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. And Jubilees 431 says, okay, so this is, this is what I was saying. So at the close of Jubilee, Cain was killed after him in the same year, for his house fell upon him, he died in the midst of his house. By the way, the previous context is Adam died the same year Cain died. That's what Jubilees is claiming. And he was killed by stones, for it was a stone he killed Abel, and by a stone he was killed in righteous judgment. So a lot of people are, I'm not sure if you have a question about a Defender of Truth. You just stated this. If, again, I don't agree with Jasher's depiction of Cain's death. So I would personally side with Jubilees because of the way Jubilees has much, much more accurate information pertaining to the patriarchs that lines up with Genesis. Everything I've already showed you tonight on the slides. We don't find that type of validation as easily for the book of Jasher. So I would side personally with Cain's death as described by Jubilees. So if that's not what you're asking, brother or sister, please make your question more specific next time. Please, guys, put your questions in all caps. That's the easiest way that I can see them. All right. James Carter is asking, do you think spoken Paleo-Hebrew even remotely resembles modern or Aramaic? A little off topic. Yeah, I have no idea, brother. No idea. I apologize. It's one of those that I don't know anyone that would know. Yeah, I have no idea, brother. NEG is asking, have you read the contradictions presented by Michael Siegel in his book about Jubilees? I have not, brother, but that's why we're doing the show tonight. If you know about a whole bunch of what are supposed contradictions, that's why I said at the opening of the show, everyone I've ever run into that claims that Jubilees contradicts Scripture, let's test them, because I promise you, there's what it usually reveals, and this is where people get really, really upset, is what it reveals more than not is that the person making that claim that there's a contradiction does not know the Old Testament very well. I hate to say it like that, man. I know that can sound harsh, but that's as nice as I can say that. That's been my experience every single time. Okay. So this is why, if you have one of those contradictions, if you have that book sitting in your house and you want to type out as a question one of those contradictions, please do so in the chat. Katie McD is asking, can you explain more why you think they would have left out Jubilees in your opinion? Oh man, we can go down a list. I mean, that's like a whole separate show. For one, I can't stress this enough. We're talking about the same religious leaders that intentionally are chopping up books like Isaiah and Jeremiah in order to hide the Messiah. So they're unabashedly willing to defend their traditions of men over the actual words of God. This is what Yeshua reprimanded them for in Mark 7 and Matthew 23. This is one of the things that got them so angry they wanted to kill him, because they're a brood of vipers. They're liars, thieves, murderers, everything that Yeshua called them in Matthew 23. I believe it after studying the history of how the texts, according to Judaism, have tried to alter things and what they ignore. In fact, guys, I don't know if many of you may not have seen this or not, but I did an entire, let me pull this up. Let me pull this up on the screen real quick. I'm going to find it's under my debates playlist, and I'll drop the link in the chat. If you have some extra time or not, if you want to be extremely frustrated watching this debate, I will, I'll drop this in the chat for you to check out, because this was me speaking with a supposed Orthodox rabbi, and we debated about the scriptures for like 3 hours. So here it is. Okay, I'm going to drop this in the chat. Okay, so this is, let me put it on the screen so everyone can see it. All right, so, and I'm going to pull your question down, Katie, so you can see the title of the video. It's my debate with Rabbi Asher Bezer, Orthodox Judaism, and in it, you're going to hear a multitude of reasons why they would throw out Jubilees. They don't like angels. They don't like how the angels had agency in the Father. They do not agree that there was actual written Torah that the angels followed in heaven that was given to the patriarchs before Moses, because most of modern Judaism upholds Moses in an idolatrous fashion. And they think everything started with Moses, and they only read the first 5 books of most, not all of them, but most of them only read the first 5 books of Moses. And then when I try to talk to him about Ezekiel and Isaiah and Psalm 110 and other passages, he just ignored them. Said, "Oh, that's just that's up for interpretation." And it's spiritual blindness. It's an incredibly large amount of spiritual blindness. This is just one gentleman, and he has a specific opinion according to his training in Judaism. But across the board in Judaism, I've found a consistency in what they teach doctrinally. Jubilees smacks them in the face, so they don't want Jubilees. They can't handle it, because Jubilees is what Messiah taught as far as the actual law of God. It explains the law of God in great detail, and it rubs against the traditions of men that Judaism has adopted over all this time. So there's a ton of reasons. I could do a whole separate show on it. All right, let's look for another quick question. Let me see. It just refreshed on me. Hang on, guys. 1 second. Please put your questions in all caps so I can easily see them. That would really help. Please put your questions in all caps so that I can easily see them. There's a lot of chat in the comment section, so you know, I'm not trying to ignore your question, but it will get skipped if it's not in all caps, because there's too many people asking in all caps, and that's easier for us to point out. Jubilees written by angels? Question mark. Tomas Tavlov. Dictated by Moses, technically written by angels. I mean, they're both there. They're all writing down the information, giving it to Moses. He's copying it down as well. So this is they're all in the same process. Basically, you're all in the same little area, basically getting this wonderful instruction and information that Moses is supposed to then take and pass on to the children of Israel. So, was it technically? I mean, technically, it's coming from the Father, but it's just being in the agency of it's being relayed, if you will, by angels to Moses. So, and that's in chapter 1. That's in just the opening chapter 1. Also, it's I think if you go to chapter 1, verse 28 through 30, and then the opening verse of chapter 2. So you should be able to see, it tells you that. All right, guys, so let's look for another quick question. All right. Okay, I think Tomas Tavlov is asking again, in Jubilees 1:5, does it contradict Exodus 18 in regards to Moses' father-in-law instructing him? Not sure what you mean about Moses' father-in-law instructing him. That's not... let's go look at Jubilees 1:5 for everyone watching so they can see what we're talking about. All right. Because this is often what happens is you get really hard to understand questions and where you just get stuff that's out of context and trying to figure out what's going on, what's being asked. Jubilees 1:5 says, and he said, incline your heart to every word which I shall speak to you on this mount, and write them in a book in order that their generations may see how I have not forsaken them for all the evil which they have wrought in transgressing the covenant, which I established between me and you for the generations this day on Mount Sinai. So we'll go to Genesis 18, or Exodus 18, which is when Jethro, priest of Midian, shows up after the children of Israel stop at Mount Sinai. And I'm not sure exactly what you're meaning. The only thing that Jethro's, the father-in-law of Moses, instructed him on is just how he was dealing with the people in regards to being a priest, being a judge who was delving out decisions according to the law of God. So he's talking about, Moses listened to his father-in-law and said, Moses chose able men out of all Israel, made them heads of the people, leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They judged the people at all times. And the only way they would do that is out of the law of God. So this is, I apologize, brother. I'm not understanding your question very well. All right. So let's see if we can find another real quick. Okay. Please put your questions in all caps. Maybe I should make a banner out of it. I don't know what to do, guys. Guys, put the cap, like when you do a capital letter, you put the caps lock on, and then write your question where it's all capitalization. And that way, I can see your questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to pass over them. I apologize. I don't know how else to say it. All right. So let me see here. Looking for, I think I saw some questions further on up when I was still going over some of the slides. Here's a unique comment by Ark Builder CCMC. Sometimes it's not about what we find, but what we don't find. In Jubilees, we do not find any intent to twist the biblical narrative, so the Bible is not compromised by Jubilees. It's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely an interesting way of looking at that. So many times people, they really struggle with, like I said, I try to address the historical mindset that most American believers have anyway, that is so skewed to begin with, because we have no experience of the outside cultures that have Bibles with different books in them that they've always had for thousands of years. And we just don't know about those people because we're so isolated many times in the United States with our experiences. So, all right, guys, I'm looking for a few more questions here. If anyone has any about the Book of Jubilees. Looks like here in Bay, I think you're asking one. It's saying, question, 13th month rabbinic, every third year, Enoch calendar adds 30 days, 13th month, Enoch 70. Not to my understanding here in Bay. It talks about how the moon is off, but it's not, it doesn't get added up from their attempt, the rabbinic calendar's attempt to create a 13th month to make up for the stuff that doesn't. Yes, the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees, chapter 74 of Enoch and chapter 6 of Jubilees talks about that the moon is off 10 days every few years. And so, or every year, which adds up in 3 years to be 30 days, 60 days in 6 years, 90 days in 9 years, that whole, you get it, right? So the 13th month would not account for that because it's not about the month. The sun guards the month. The moon does not. The moon comes in less days than the sun as far as the monthly calendar. So both Enoch and Jubilees explain to you that the sun is what controls the 30-day time periods of the months. The moon follows a different course. So I'm only speculating because, again, I apologize. Your question is not specifically worded. I'm just assuming that this is what you're asking about, okay? And I'm trying to do my best, guys. I can only assume what you're asking if you don't make a very clearly worded question. And I hope to not offend anybody, but that I want to be able to answer your questions. That's why I'm doing the Q&A concept. But please try to make your question as specific as possible if you can. Homestead Venture is asking if archaeological evidence shows that over 30 civilizations historically observed a 360-day calendar, presumably successfully, prior to 700 BC, how can we reconcile the 364-day calendar of Jubilees? So you would have to show the archaeological evidence first to show that 30 civilizations observed a 360 calendar. You do have a 360 both mentioned in Jubilees and in Enoch. Remember, there's the 4 intercalary days. And I don't know if, I'm sure you're aware of that, but it's even in the book of in the book of Enoch at the very end, it talks about the 360 days. But once you add in those 4 intercalary days, it becomes a 364. And those are, they're like their own special day, so to speak. So that's a part of both of those calendars. They're both based off 360, but then you have the 4 intercalary days. That's why they line up so easily. But here's the other thing you got to keep in mind. Archaeological evidence, again, that's a huge broad thing you're saying. I don't know where that evidence is coming from. I haven't seen it. That's a claim that you're making, and I'm not saying that you're wrong, but that's a claim that you're making that you got to ask yourself, well, that wouldn't even fit with the rabbinical calendar either. So then what, this show tonight was not intended to be a calendar debate or a calendar deep dig into different types of calendars, but which civilization would be following something like that, and what conclusions, I guess, are you trying to make from that? Because all of Israel, both pre-rabbinical Judaism and then post, doesn't follow that style of calendar, if that makes any sense. So unless you're just arguing for a Sumerian style calendar, which would be maybe something completely different. And I have not researched the Sumerian calendars, so I couldn't really speak confidently on that. So, all right, man. Christopher Gomez is asking. I apologize. You put it all in caps, brother, but it's not a question, so I apologize. I'm not sure, man. I'm not sure what you're asking. Rule Garcia, July 3rd is when we'll have Zen back on and finish up our discussion on serpent seed theory. So it looks like Matt Atwood is asking, Sun Guards month? No. Sirach 4368 says the month literally means moon. Matt, brother, that seems like 2 questions, and both of them are abbreviated. So are you, I want to ask your questions. I really do. I just need to know exactly what you're asking. I really need an. All right, so let's go to Sirach real quick, and we'll pull up Sirach 43 so that we can look at it. We'll all look at it together. All right, and I'll try to pull it over here for us. Sirach 43. It actually comes up quite a bit, by the way. All right. It's not the most popular question, but it does come up a lot. So I definitely want to talk about it. Let me magnify this so that we can all read it together, hopefully. Okay, so we'll start. Even though your question is a few verses down, let's start with the previous context, the beginning of the chapter. It says in verse 1, the pride of the heavenly heights is the clear firmament, the appearance of heaven in a spectacle of glory. The sun, when it appears, making proclamation as it goes forth, is a marvelous instrument, the work of the Most High. At noon it parches the land, and who can withstand its burning heat? A man tending a furnace works in burning heat, but the sun burns the mountains 3 times as much. It breathes out fiery vapors, and with bright beams it blinds the eyes. Great is the Lord who made it, and at his command it hastens on its course. He made the moon also to serve in its season, to mark the times, to be an everlasting sign. From the moon comes the sign for feast days, a light that wanes when it has reached the full. The month is named for the moon, increasing marvelously in its phases, an instrument of the host of high, shining forth on the firmament of heaven. And then it goes on to talk about the stars. Okay, so I'm trying to look at your question. Sun guards the months. No, the sun is, if I think I hear what you're saying, is it, are you, okay, let me see if you maybe put a clarifier question in the chat. But if you're asking about why the sun controls the months as far as the day, 360 divided by 12, because the moon doesn't follow the sun in the same course, as we all know and we can observe, and as both Enoch and Jubilees explains to us. But yes, the months themselves can easily be named after the word month. That's fine. That doesn't change how we would actually calculate and how we observe them in the sky. And yes, the new moons, which are feast days, according to Jubilee 6, that are supposed to be everlasting, they're definitely determined by the moon. So that would definitely be, definitely. All right, let me see if I can see another quick question real quick. And if I didn't do justice on that one, Matt, please, try to fill up how many words you can put in the comment and make it a little bit more complicated question so I can understand what you're asking. Miss Peggy D is asking in Jubilees 3:35, Jubilees 3:35 and 4 and 1. Do you have an understanding of the timeline that Cain was born after Adam and Eve left Eden? Does it depend? Miss Peggy D, I will be going over this on July 3rd. So yeah, stick around. July 3rd, I'll be going over that. 2 weeks from tonight, we'll be discussing these verses. So, all right, let's see if I can see another one real quick. James Carter is asking, do you think the long day of Joshua and the sundial event could have tweaked the clock of Yah? It's possible, but I don't know, because we're not on a ball in space. All he has to do is set them aright, just stop them and start them again. He doesn't. It's not a ball in space, man. It's just, all he's got to do is literally stop them and start them again in the heavenlies. And he just has an extra long day if he chooses to have it. That's fine. So yes, it could be, but I'm not sure where you're going with it as far as trying to make some sort of theological, recalculation out of it. I personally don't see how, if he did, if it's not tweaking the clock, so to speak, how it would have changed anything significantly for or against. Does that make any sense? But if you have further explanation on what you're thinking, drop it as another comment so I can understand better. Okay, Matt, this is what you're trying to get at, is you're saying that because of what Sirach is saying, that the month means moon, therefore the sun does not guard the month, the moon does. Okay, well, I guess I'll have to say that that's not what First Enoch says when it talks about how the days and the months are determined by the sun. The moon is a little different. The moon helps us determine feast days, and also can be a part of calculating certain things in the month. But just because the name itself comes off of the moon, even in the book of Enoch, it says there's 2 different names for the moon. But just because the name month can be derived from the Hebrew word for moon, I'm not sure exactly, I guess maybe how you're using the word guard and what you're trying to mean by guard, other than simply, the sun is what determines the most consistent 360 to 364 day calendar. And then the moon has a different, as if it comes through and it's phased and it cycles less. You see what I'm saying? So we don't keep days off of the moon other than the new moon celebration, that feast day, as far as I understand. So I think I'm addressing what you're saying. Okay. All right. Dante Mara is asking a good question. Okay, because this is a common question you get with the book of Jasher, even though we're talking about the book of Jubilees tonight. But he's asking about Joshua 10 through 13 and then 2 Samuel. These are the most common mentions of the book of Jasher and some concepts in it. And you're also claiming that 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8 is somehow validating the book of Jasher. So let me take a quick look at it, and I'll put it on screen for everyone to look at together. And the Jonathan Jammers, yeah, okay. So what we don't have from the book, like I've said before, without the historical validation, yes, you have a book mentioned by name called the Book of Jasher in Scripture, in both in Joshua and 2 Samuel, like you talked about. And yes, you have two men with the name that were the opposing priests of Moses that were working for Pharaoh. Again, this is information that anyone that comes along later and writes a distorted version of Jasher can just use just like they used all the information in the Bible, not just the names of these two dudes. They also use the proper names of Moses. In fact, the book of Jasher says there's like 8 different names of Moses, but his parents named him something, somebody else named something, that Pharaoh's daughter named him something. I mean, you've got all these different names of people that they would have gleaned, all these different facts and details that if I were to write a book that's trying to parrot biblical knowledge, biblical information from other manuscripts, then I got a wealth to work with, right? I've got names of cities, people, events, times, and dates. I just put my own book together, a narrative with those same ideas and with these slight tweaks, and that's the tweaks is what we're getting at, right? It's the question arises, the red flag arises when you start to see certain things that are so far away from other validated manuscripts that you're asking, okay, well then if I believe Jasher over in this particular case, if I believe Jasher, then suddenly I'm not believing 3 other books. Then that's where I struggle, all right? And that's where I look for try to do a deeper comparison analysis. And this is where I'm trying not to completely dismiss Jasher, but at the same time, I don't want to just say, I cannot say that it's the same book being referenced in 2 Samuel and Joshua, okay? Because we also have books mentioned like the Book of the Wars, the whole bunch of other books. There's like 10 books mentioned in the Old Testament that many of them we don't even have today at all. So the book of Jasher that we do have today, is it the actual one that's being mentioned from a long ago? I don't know. It's hard to say, because if it is, boy, you sure did get a lot of stuff wrong. You know what I mean? So that's all. All right. Let me see here. I think I missed a couple questions further back up a minute ago. Oh, I see. Okay, Matt. Matt was trying to he's trying to add more to his initial question about the 7th day as a feast day, so it must be appointed by the moon. Okay, so this is where context would come in, right? Because we have the 7th day before any appointment or any declaration in both in Jubilees or in Genesis, before the declaration of what that is or how we observe that, from what you're claiming, which is, I'm guessing you adhere to Lunar-Sabbatarian theology, that we should have to monitor the 7th day of the week by the moon. But that's not what Genesis says, right? That the Sabbath that is ordained forever, just like in Jubilees chapter 2, is ordained on the 7th day of creation. And that it was set apart and made holy on the 7th day of creation. And there's nowhere in there that says that the 7th day of creation is arbitrarily chosen by the patterns of the moon. I know that you're trying to make Sirach 43 say that. Respectfully, I would disagree, brother, because we can count to 7 every week, and that's been consistent throughout all of Scripture. It's a feast day, 100%. Leviticus 23, 1 through 3, it's a feast day, absolutely. But the context of which feast day is governed by the moon, that's what I spent explaining to Katie earlier for about 10 minutes, which is the idea of the new moon celebrations. This is why I said earlier, you don't even get that explained to you in the canon of 66 without the book of Jubilees. For anyone celebrating lunar Sabbatarian theology, if you want to keep doing that, I'm not going to berate you. I'm not going to say you're insane or anything like. I'm just going to say you 100% believe you would not had come to that conclusion if you grew up in Ethiopia and you had the Book of Jubilees in your Bible, because you would have never been able to make that leap to think that, oh, the sun or the moon must be telling me when to observe the seventh day, because you would have been told clearly from the Book of Jubilees what the new moon celebration is and what that feast day is, why it was created and originated, and how it's celebrated. So essentially, the canon that we have today has put us at a disadvantage for that specific celebration of the new moon. So therefore, it's turned into its own kind of separate doctrine that is, based on a situation where you start counting the moon and trying to find the seventh day, and you can't do it consistently every month. So then sometimes you have 8 or 9 days in between Sabbaths every month. And that, to me, just goes too much against what is clear and plainly written as far as the Sabbath is the seventh day. That's simple as that. So I apologize, brother. I think I finally understand your question, and I would not agree on that end. Let me see I think there's a few more questions here. Okay. Justin Wilcox, I'll pull this up for you. He's asking about when the Sabbath start. Let me pull this up for you. We did an entire episode on this, on milk and meat, actually. And I'll show you which one that is, and I'll drop it in the chat. All right, so here it is. So this was, I don't know, February 28th this year. We talk about the Sabbath starting at evening and sunrise, and I'll put this in the chat for you right now. That's the video you can go check out. We go over lots of scriptures, and I even made some little charts and everything to try to make it easy to understand. So check that out, brother. All right, see if there's any more questions. Looks like Thomas Tavalov is asking, implication of Abraham creating modern farming. How did they survive before Jubilees 11 through 22? Yeah, we've got Cain and Abel Abel's bringing forth the fruits of the ground, or Cain is bringing forth the fruits of the ground. So that's a huge swath, brother. If you could maybe narrow down what specific verse you're thinking about in Jubilees chapters 11 through 22. Jubilees has some pretty meaty chapters, each one of them. So if you can kind of whittle down what verse you're thinking of, but the idea of Abraham just creating a better way to farm in a broad scale for an entire people group, that's cool, man. I mean, the wisdom of the Lord will give you inventions, but as far as there's so much evidence that they had higher technology and abilities to farm and create food for themselves before the flood, before the flood and after the flood, obviously, because you have Noah carrying that knowledge forward after the flood. So, yeah. Yeah, that's we all have our opinions, guys. But you're welcome. You're always welcome to go back and check out the episodes again and look at the verses that are presented. That's all I can do. I can just put forward verses. Light of the Hill Ministries is asking, where would you place Jubilees in the canon? Where would I place it? I mean, honestly, the canon, if you're talking about the canon of the United States, American 66 canon, I think that's a combobulated mess already, as far as if we're talking just chronologically, there's, and then when you start to say, well, chronologically, what do you mean? Like according to when it supposedly was written, or according to the events that are taking place in the book being described? So this is why a lot of people just think, well, Genesis should come first, since it starts at the beginning of creation, right? And that's probably pretty valid, But then that's why the Pharisaical Judaism has tried to call Jubilees the lesser Genesis, because it has all the same information plus a ton more than Genesis that helps you with all kinds of understanding for the Torah that makes more sense by the time you get to Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But there's a few passages in Genesis that are not put in Jubilees, specifically about Joseph and prophecy and stuff like that. So I would probably put it, to be honest with you, I mean, if you put it chronologically in a timeline, I'd put it right there at Exodus 33 when Moses is on top of the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, right? So Exodus would be broken up with the book of Jubilees, basically. It'd be like Exodus, chapter 1 to chapter 32, or chapter 1 to chapter 32, and then it would be the book of Jubilees, and then pick up the rest of Exodus. But as far as just like, if I had to place it, I would just probably place it between Genesis and Exodus, basically. So, all right. All right, guys. If there's any other questions, please put them in all caps. That way I can see quickly your question and address them. All right. I think she was talking to somebody else just then. Okay, guys. I'm scrolling back up if I missed it. Right. Okay. All right. Let me see here. Okay. Maria A is asking, who was reigning at the time when this book was written? I don't know about who was reigning. Again, that's why I tried to show our, like we talked about earlier. I'm not sure if you just got here, sister, or if you saw the opening 20 minutes. I went over the timeline of the claim of Jubilees itself, that it was given to Moses on Mount Sinai during the 40 days. And then also that the oldest surviving manuscript that we have, according to historians, is the 2nd century BC. But there's a ton of evidence to show that it's much, much older than that. So there's, I just showed a little bit tonight, guys. And I didn't have time to put a full-on comparison of every verse in Jubilees with the regular canon and show you that it teaches literally the exact same stuff in every regard, because that would be an Honor of Kings episode. In fact, that would be about 20 Honor of Kings episodes. So we hope to do those in the future. But I'm not sure if Moses technically would be reigning, Moses and Aaron. All right, let's see if I missed another question real quick. Yeah, unfortunately, the software that I'm using, guys, I only get to scroll up so much. It doesn't let me scroll all the way back up, and it could just be a live streaming thing with YouTube and not even my software. But if you have a question that you asked earlier and I was answering someone else's question and then it got passed over, I apologize. Just retype it, copy, paste it, retype it, put it down fresh and new so that I see it. Energy, you've got to ask me one. This is the second time, brother. You got to ask me one. If you don't ask me what one of the, I don't know which one you're thinking of, and I've already addressed several tonight, but you've got to ask me one. There, I can make up one for you right now that I hear all the time, and it's what Jubilees chapter 50 talks about: no sex on the Sabbath. And this is one that gets people all riled up, because basically, you get a lot of people want to have sex on the Sabbath. That's their day off work, and that's their downtime, and I guess they get in the mood. Who knows? But Jubilees says that a person shouldn't have sex on the Sabbath. Well, can we see anything like that that's in the canon of 66 that would validate that idea? Well, yeah, it's Leviticus 14 and 15, the cleanliness laws. So if the Leviticus 23, 1 through 3 says the Sabbath is the weekly Sabbath, is a feast day, and on the feast days you are to bring a sacrifice to the temple, or you're to do that in honor of the kingdom, in honor of your day of rest that's to come in the future. And then your behavior is trying to align with that behavior that you'll experience in the kingdom, which will also be to bring sacrifices, to make meals with the Father, right, in a day of resting and relaxation and joy. Then that's why you would have the cleanliness laws for not being able to have sex before you'd come to the temple, or to bring your sacrifice to the priest at the doorway of the temple of the tabernacle. So it's basically just the application of what you already have in Leviticus and Exodus. Jubilees states it with one sentence: don't have sex on the Sabbath. But if you lived in ancient Israel 1,800 years ago, or 3,800 years ago, and you're walking this out day by day, and then you start to realize, okay, we're going to bring a meal before the Father on the Sabbath because it's a feast day, and I need to come before the tent of meeting because I'm going to listen to the Torah being read by one of the priests, then I need to be clean in order to do that on Saturdays. I can't have sex. So that's easy. That's just, all right, guys, I'm going to take a couple more questions, and then I really appreciate everyone participating tonight. Yeah. Again, brother, if you do have any that you've read from someone else, you're welcome to ask them tonight. That's the entire reason I'm doing this show. So you're welcome to ask them. Talking about them is not asking them. So just if you can, just type in all caps your actual question that you've heard other people make an objection to the Book of Jubilees. I'll be glad to go over it from my perspective. And all right, so James Carter is asking, do you have a favorite passage in Jubilees? One of mine is 14:1 and 23:26. I know the 23 one. That's a great one. I don't have 14 memorized. Let me go to that one real quick. Yeah, it's a great verse. Let me pull it up for everyone else to be blessed by it. So it says, chapter 14:1 of Jubilees. After these things, in the 4th year of this week, on the new moon of the 3rd month, that's explained to us in Jubilees chapter 6, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a dream, saying, "Fear not, Abram. I'm your defender, and your reward will be exceedingly great." So, yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. All right, guys. I appreciate everybody. James Sims is asking, do you have a show that covers things mentioned in the 66 book canon that couldn't have been known by the authors, writers of them, unless they had new things of books not considered part of the 66? I don't have a specific show on that. We do that kind of interlaced in a lot of our broadcasts already. When we talk about scriptures, I mean, we did that, and it's not specific though is the problem. And most of it's just referencing Enoch and Jubilees and Wisdom of Sirach and the Wisdom of Solomon, and a lot of these books that used to be in the Bible that we find validation and cross-referencing to. But as far as a show that specifically goes over authors of the canon of 66 books that they knew other stuff of books that aren't part of it, I mean, that is what Honor of Kings, the show, is all about. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it or not, but that's the general premise. Is we compare the canon of 66 with all these other books that were not included or used to be but were taken out. So you're welcome to check that out, brother. It's on the playlist. Honor of Kings season 1 and season 2. You can binge watch 40 episodes, brother. Yeah, we do a lot. All right. Okay, I don't see any other questions, guys. I do see a question. I just don't understand it. I apologize. JD94123 saying, wouldn't that sound like a contradiction to non-believers since it says in Romans that Yah loves sinners before we loved him? I'm not sure if you're talking to me, if you're answering someone else in the chat, but you said you put it in all caps, man. Wouldn't that sound like a contradiction to non-believers since it says in Romans that Yah loves sinners before we loved him? I apologize, man. I don't know which verse you're speaking about in Jubilees that you feel Romans contradicts that. But the book of Jubilees, let me pull this up for you, brother. The book of Jubilees in chapter 1, I think it's in verse 22. No, it's not. It's in verse 20. Yeah, here it is. Verse 24. All right, I'm gonna pull this up for you, brother. Okay. I don't know if you guys haven't read the book of Jubilees. I would highly surprise, and suggest that you go take a look at it. Verse 24. After he just continues to tell them that he will circumcise their hearts and their skin at the resurrection, he goes on to say in verse 24, and they shall all be called children of the living God, and every angel and every spirit shall know, yes, they shall know that these are my children, and that I am their father in uprightness and righteousness, and that I love them. So this is a unique passage here in Jubilees chapter 1, very first chapter, because we don't get the fact that God loves. In fact, the word love is not even used in the Masoretic Genesis until chapter 22. And I think it's not until Deuteronomy. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please put it in the chat. But I think it's not until Deuteronomy that we actually see Yahweh telling the children of Israel, I love you. But in Jubilees chapter 1, verse 24, he tells them right out the gate. So yeah, I'm not sure what exactly you're looking at as a contradiction, but maybe just expound with a different question. All right, guys. We'll have to do a different show on the calendar issue, because this is in the latter chapters of Jubilees, and it's in an entire, like an entire chapter. It goes over, I think it's actually a chapter and a half. It goes over the course of the sun and the moon. Excuse me, I said Jubilees. I meant to say First Enoch. Okay, so this is in the book of First Enoch, and there's like almost a chapter and a half that goes over the course of the sun and moon. I think it starts in chapter 83 and then goes forward to 84. So that's we'll have to do a whole separate show on that, because I see that a lot of people have questions about it. But ultimately, what I don't want to get into is an entire debate with the lunar Sabbath idea, because we've just emphatically tried to show that, I mean, the Sabbath is the seventh day of the week, and that's what it's always been. And it's not arbitrary, that changes every month. You know what I mean? So, all right, guys, I love everybody. I appreciate you being here, and you guys are awesome. Hopefully you enjoy your day of rest. If you're celebrating today, if you're not, check it out. It's eternal. It's a day of rest. The Father literally gave you a day off every week because he loves you. And we practice the behavior on this day of rest according to the behavior that we're going to keep in the kingdom, right? Which is, we're not going to be working for money. We just take a day off and we chill. We enjoy the Father, read some scripture, soak up in his presence, just enjoy him. That's the beautiful part of us practicing his instructions, so that when we get resurrected into his house, we'll be doing them eternally and forever. All right. Let it bless you. Hope you guys have a great weekend.